to Exploring Early Music. I'm Max Ramage. If you're like me, you've spent a lot of time trying to play in tune. But what if I told you that in some cases, perfect intonation is impossible? Let's take a look at the strange world of temperament. A sound wave is produced when something causes a medium like air to vibrate. Like other waves, sound waves have frequency and amplitude. Historically, music theorists have considered two notes to be in tune with each other when their frequencies relate according to a simple ratio. For example, the interval of an octave involves two notes, one of which has a frequency that's exactly twice that of the other. In the case of a perfect fifth, the higher pitch has a frequency that's 1.5 times as great as the frequency of the lower pitch. And in a perfect fourth, the upper note's frequency is 4/3 times as great as the lower frequency. We can express these intervals as ratios. An octave is 2:1, a fifth is 3:2, and a fourth is 4:3. As for the other consonant or pleasant-sounding intervals, a major third is 5:4, and a minor third is 6:5. All these ratios involve small integers. By contrast, a semitone, which is dissonant, has the ratio 16:15. The importance of simple ratios of whole numbers for intonation and consonants derives from the Greek philosopher Pythagoras and his experiments with strings of carefully proportioned lengths. The idea took on a more modern guise once it was discovered that sound had a frequency. Thus, Galileo wrote in 1638 that agreeable consonances are pairs of tones which strike the ear with a certain regularity. This regularity consists in the fact that the pulses delivered by the two tones in the same interval of time shall be commensurable in number. However, we should make a distinction between pure sine tones, which are sounds whose waveform is a simple sine function, and complex tones, which consist of a fundamental sine function plus one or more additional harmonics, or integer multiples of that fundamental pitch. Drawing on the work of German physicist Hermann von Helmholtz, 20th century experiments suggested that although simple frequency ratios produce the most pleasant sounding intervals between complex tones, there might not be any relation between simple ratios and consonants for pure sine tones. Nevertheless, because the sounds of early music are complex, that is, rich in overtones, we can assume for the purposes of this video that the simple ratio rule determines consonance and intonation. At first, the concept of being in tune seems fairly straightforward. Whenever possible, let the frequencies of your notes be in simple whole number ratios to one another. However, there's an acoustical property that throws a wrench in the works, and it's what we might call the intransivity of intonation. In math, a relation is transitive if, when it holds between A and B and between B and C, it also holds between A and C. For example, equality is a transitive relation. If A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C. Now, let's consider the relation called being in tune. The surprising fact is that you can play a series of notes, each of which is perfectly in tune with the one before it, and yet the two endpoints of that series may be out of tune with each other. If you play this series of notes on piano, the last note sounds the same as the first, because a piano has only one A key in that octave. But this means a piano is actually out of tune relative to ideal pitch ratios. If we could make each note in the series perfectly in tune with the one before it, the first and last pitches would clash like this. To get from A to D, you multiply the frequency of the A by 2/3. To get from D up to G, multiply by 4/3. Repeating that operation gets you from G to C. And to obtain the pure minor third from C down to A, you multiply by 5/6. The product of all these ratios is a bit less than 1. Therefore, the final A has a slightly lower pitch than the starting A. This discrepancy between the endpoints is known as the syntonic comma. In the history of Western music, we encounter numerous ways of resolving the syntonic comma and other similar dissonances. These methods, which involve adjustments of certain intervals away from their pure rational forms, are called temperaments. A temperament is a systematic way of handling unavoidable difficulties in tuning. It's especially important for instruments with a certain degree of fixed pitch, including keyboards and fretted string instruments like guitar. For example, a pianist can't adjust the lengths of the piano strings while playing, so we need a system that tells us how to tune the strings beforehand. Despite a few exceptions, temperament is generally less important for instruments with more flexible pitch. The open strings of a violin are usually tuned to pure 3/2 fifths, and the violinist can make subtle intonation adjustments through finger placement. One of the most popular temperaments in the 16th and 17th centuries was called quarter comma mean tone. The idea behind this temperament was to make the octaves and major thirds purely in tune, which was accomplished by shrinking the interval of the fifth by 1/4 of the syntonic comma. That's where quarter comma comes from. As for the other part of the name, mean tone, that word implies that the size of the whole step used in this tuning system is exactly half the size of the major third. Even though the fifths in quarter comma mean tone deviate from the ideal 3/2 ratio, the distortion is so slight that these intervals still sound basically in tune. Because of its pure thirds, this temperament is very good for triadic harmony. But there's more to the story. The problem with quarter comma mean tone is that in order to preserve pure octaves, one of the 12 fifths has to be egregiously out of tune. This out of tune interval is called the wolf fifth because it howls like this. As long as you're playing music that avoids the wolf, quarter comma mean tone works fine. But in the 18th century, composers started to use unusual keys and modulations more frequently, and it became impossible to avoid that scary interval. This necessitated alternative temperaments. Well temperaments are those that contain no wolf intervals, and can therefore be used for music in any key. Most of these tuning systems were unequal, in the sense that not all of their semitones were the same size. This meant that different major and minor keys had different sonic characters. It's likely that J.S. Bach composed his well-tempered clavier for an unequally tempered instrument. Another type of well temperament is equal temperament. Over the course of 2.5 centuries, equal temperament grew in popularity until it dominated Western musical practice in the late 1800s, and it shows no sign of relinquishing its grip. Equal temperament makes every half step exactly 1/12 the size of an octave. There are no wolf intervals in this temperament, and every key sounds the same. It's clear that equal temperament is a convenient, consistent way to tune keyboards. But it does have drawbacks. For one thing, its major thirds are a bit larger than the ideal 5:4 ratio, which means that triads in equal temperament may sound less beautiful than those in some other well temperament or in quarter comma mean tone. Nevertheless, in our 21st century, the sound of equal temperament is deeply ingrained. Virtually all pop keyboard music is played in equal temperament, and so is all classical piano music, outside of the historical performance movement and a few experimental works. As a result, even though some intervals in equal temperament are distortions of pure intervals, those distortions may still sound better to modern ears simply because they're more familiar. In historically informed performance, though, other temperaments are often advisable. Here's a major triad in pure intonation, quarter comma mean tone, a historical temperament, and equal temperament, the system in use today. I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to temperament, and remember, being in tune isn't as simple as it seems. Happy listening!